Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Guitar Talk with Todd. Thanks for checking in today. As always, make sure you subscribe to the page. We appreciate you checking in and watching the show. But see that little box down there in that corner right there? Make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really means a lot to us. We're trying to get our subscribers up here, so we appreciate it. Check us out on Facebook at Todd Beebe Music. Today we have another guitar review. This is the awesome Gibson Firebird. This is a 2017 model, so this is a little bit newer of a one in the grand scheme of things compared to some of the older ones. This is what they would call a Firebird 5. I'm going to explain all that in a minute. So I did a setup on this today for a private owner who brought it in, and they were generous enough to let us do this and do a review on it, so I thank them for letting us do this today. Very, very, very cool guitar, and I just love Gibson Firebirds. Let's give a real quick history here real quick of the Gibson Firebird. So let's go back to the late 1950s here. Gibson had just had a run there with a lot of groundbreaking stuff. The Les Paul was out in 58. They started doing the Sunburst on that model, which of course is very iconic, and everyone talks about that. The Les Paul Sunbursts, of course. With 58, we also had the Modern, which we've done a video on, whether that existed or not, but check that video out. We had the Explorer, the Flying V, all of those. So it was a very iconic time. But early 60s came, and Gibson president Ted McCarty was still watching the sales of Fender guitars, and things were not where he wanted them to quite be with Gibson. Fender was still selling an awful lot of their guitars. He kind of wanted to still mix it up a little bit more. Things had kind of flopped that later came back and became big guitars for Gibson. Particularly, I'm talking about the Gibson Explorer right here. That was one that they kind of wanted to see take off, and ultimately it did years later. But there in the late 50s, it was kind of doing okay, but not what they wanted it to. And so the story goes that Ted McCarty was at a convention where retired automobile designer Ray Dietrich was at. And Ray Dietrich had designed a lot of cars. You can look his name up. That was what he did for work. He was a very iconic name in the automobile industry, and he had designed tons of cars and had his own business and that type of thing. And he was very well known for that. Well, in his years after he retired fairly young actually, and when he did, he would do conventions and things like that and kind of talk about his years in the automobile industry and what got him particular ideas he had and whatnot. And story goes that Ted McCarty, Gibson president at that time, was at one of these conventions, and he approached Dietrich and said, "Hey, this is going to sound crazy, but what would you think about designing a guitar?" And Dietrich was all over it. He said, "Oh man, that would be great. Let's try it." And so he sat down and came up with a design, and this was it, the Gibson Firebird. And you can see it's very car-like, for lack of a better term. It used to always kind of confuse me when I first got into these guitars, because you would hear the term that like this was a reverse model, and I used to be, a lot of people I'm sure have that same problem. You're thinking, so was the original one regular and then they came up with the reverse, or how did that work? But no, the very first original ones, and the model that is most popular, which is what I'm holding right here, are usually called reverse. They are called reverse. And then later on, they did a non-reverse model. And the reason it's called that is because of the way it's kind of shaped here, especially for that time, with the outer edge here sort of protruding more than on a traditional shaped guitar. It almost looked reversed. So they just started calling these reversed because of their body shape. And later on, they did one that was called a non-reverse Firebird. I'm going to throw some pictures up of that. So Dietrich came up with this design, and then he also came up with the name Firebird for it. It's a very unique model still for Gibson to this day. There's no other guitar really made like it. I don't even think in other companies I'm going to say there are. The biggest reason why is that most guitars, and I'm going to talk about this more when we show it in the case and do close-ups of the body and stuff. Traditionally, most Gibson guitars, your Les Pauls and everything like that, are what they call a set-in neck, which means it's two pieces, the body and the neck, but the neck is permanently glued in and you can't take it out, and you can see on the back where it's set in and glued in. Fender, Stratocasters, those type of things are bolt-on guitars, so they're a little bit different, even than actually totally different than what a set-in, neck is. This is actually the first model that's called a neck through, and what that means, and again, we'll get some close-ups of it in the case so you can see what I'm talking about. The neck and the body are not separate pieces. This is all one piece of wood that goes actually from the very tip of the headstock all the way to here. And if I get some close-ups of this, you can kind of see it's basically, that's the piece right here that I'm talking about. It runs all the way to the back, and then these mahogany wings are just glued on. So ultimately, the guitar is really just this piece right here, but it does not, like I said, I'll get some more close-ups of this in the case, but you cannot see any separation back here as you would on a Les Paul or something like that where the neck is set in. It's not. This is one entire piece of wood. Because of that reason, they're very hard to make. So there's been various times throughout Gibson's history where they didn't make them at all, and then of course they keep being kind of forced to because there's definitely a cult following for this. Johnny Winter, Alan Collins from the great Lynyrd Skynyrd band was a huge Firebird player. You'd see many pictures of Alan with his Firebird back in the day. Rickey Medlocke from Lynyrd Skynyrd and obviously Blackfoot before he was in Lynyrd Skynyrd played one. Check out my interview with Rickey. I'm going to put a link below to that. There's the full interview, and I also posted some audio a while back, so make sure you check that out. But Rickey has definitely been a long-time Firebird player as well. I know Eric Clapton did in his early years. I think he played a Firebird 1, and I want to talk about that for a little bit too. Usually with Gibsons, it's like custom standard. You kind of know the custom has more binding and fancier woods, like maybe ebony instead of rosewood and whatnot. So even with that, they didn't go with those names. They chose numbers. So you had the Firebird 1, the Firebird 3, and the Firebird 5, which is what this is. The Firebird 7. And if you kind of notice, I'm going in odd numbers there. So the ones I skipped were like the 2 and the 4. And those are set aside for the Thunderbirds, which are actually basses. So Firebird 2 and Firebird 4 are really like Thunderbirds of what you would call a Gibson bass. And the different models, I'm going to post a clip up here of the chart that kind of talks about it. Firebird 1 obviously was the original one pickup, stud bridge, tailpiece. You had the chrome hardware, dot inlays, no neck binding, very stripped down, very cool guitars though. Then the Firebird 3 came out. These were all 1963. 2 pickups that had the stud bridge as well. Gibson Vibrola that was on there, and you could kind of either choose between the Vibrola or just the stud tailpiece. Chrome hardware, dot inlays, and it did have neck binding. And then the Firebird 5, I'm going to say, was probably the most common one. That was what Johnny Winter was kind of known for playing. That's what this is. And the Firebird 5 has 2 pickups, just like this does. 2 pneumatic bridge. A lot of the earlier ones had the Lyre Vibrola on there. And but the reissues and what they made in later years, which obviously this is, they just kind of went with the stud tailpiece and the 2 pneumatic bridge. You did have the neck binding, and then you also had the trapezoid inlays. I'm going to get some close-ups of that here in a second, like I always do. Then the Firebird 7 was kind of like what you would call the custom model of this. So a lot of them had the ebony fingerboard instead of rosewood, which this does. 2 pneumatic bridge, binding. A lot of them had gold hardware, block inlays, as you would have on a custom instead of trapezoid and that type of thing. Years later, somewhere in the later years of Henry Juskowitz's time with Gibson, he released the Firebird X, which didn't go over well. There's a big history of that. I think it's one of the things that kind of tarnished Henry's reputation a little bit. You can look up tons of videos about that. The Firebird X, I think years later they did a video where they ran over a bunch of them and demolished them, and that was pretty talked about and controversial, and it was just kind of a mess. A lot of people don't even like to put the Firebird X in with the regular Firebirds because they dislike them. So I actually played one of those guitars once, and it was fine. I could see what people were talking about, where it's a little bit crazy and different than what you would traditionally have, and it was kind of one of the things, along with the robot tuners and all that people didn't want anything to do with, that Henry was coming out with at that time. But anyway, that was one more step in the series of the history of the Gibson Firebird. And then, of course, they had the non-reverse, what they call Firebirds, which are kind of flipped around. Again, I'm going to throw some pictures up of those. So the other thing you had with these was what they called banjo-style tuners. So instead of having the tuners up here or whatever, they were on the back. This has the Steinberger tuners on it because it's a later model. As you can see, the headstock, that's pretty much what they looked like since back in the day in 1963. That was even way unique for Gibson at the time. Instead of 3 on each side, you had the 6 in a row. And again, like I said, you had the banjo types of the tuners were always in the back. Kind of exactly how this is, but these are Steinbergers on this. You have Gibson on the truss rod cover. That's pretty much a traditional feature that's always been on them. Rosewood fingerboard, which this one has. Again, this is a Firebird 5. You always see these in Roman numerals, so it would be listed as like a Firebird V. And trapezoid inlays going up here. I also want to talk about the humbuckers on this. These are what they would call mini humbuckers. You can see they're not as big as a traditional humbucker on a Gibson would be. Pretty much like the size of a P90 pickup, and a lot of rumors have kind of gone around through the years that these are basically P90s, but with chrome covers on them. That's not true. These are humbuckers in their own right. They're just mini humbuckers. They're not as big as a traditional one. This one has the Nashville Tune-O-Matic style bridge, stop bar tailpiece, and of course the iconic Gibson Firebird logo that came on there. Interestingly enough, the early ones in '63 did not have that. And then Ted McCarty and Ray Dietrich decided to go ahead and start putting that emblem on, and they've been on pretty much all of them. I know Gibson, this is 2022, Gibson just reissued Johnny Winter's Firebird 5, and the custom shop put out a exact carbon copy of that, to right down to they did x-rays on the guitar, and it was crazy. You can check out videos are all over about that one. And they even, they replicated all the finish wear and everything, and it looks exactly like his. It's a carbon copy. They do that a lot these days, and they did that with his Firebird, Johnny being one of the most iconic Firebird players of all time. There's a lot of guys out there. These are but these are very different, so a lot of guys don't like them. The thing with this guitar, the string length is so. Here's the very end of here's the very end of where the low E is, and it goes all the way. So this is a lot of string length here, and you can feel that. It's got a very, for lack of a better term, like a slinkier feel to it. Everything's very loose and everything's very big. These are very delicate guitars too, for the reason we were talking about earlier. You hear all these stories about the tilted headstock on a Les Paul. This also has that, which makes it the same way, fragile. If it falls off a guitar stand or whatever, that'll snap very easy. Problem is, that's a separate piece on a Les Paul. Even though it's glued in, the neck is not connected directly in with this. Remember, all this is one piece of wood. So if this snaps off, you're in real trouble. This whole thing is kind of affected by it. You lose a lot of the sustain, and again, that gets off into a whole other topic. I've heard some people say their guitars sound better when that happens and they get them repaired. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but again, everybody's got different opinions on what they're hearing. So into my ears when that happens, especially on a Firebird. You lose a lot of sustain and stuff because even when it's re-glued, you've affected that piece of wood, which now not only affects the neck, but again, even the body, because keep in mind, this is one piece of wood going from here to here. There's no separation at all. So the mini humbuckers on this, here's the neck position, have a brighter, almost like a P90-ish sound to them, but not, because they're humbuckers, so they do have a very bright tone to them, even on the lead. Rhythm pickup, neck pickup, a little bit bassier as you traditionally have with a Gibson setup, but they still have that brighter tone than, you know, even like Johnny Winter's tone was always a little bit edgier. It had that brighter sound to it. You can't really get a super deep sound. I mean, you can on a Firebird. I can cut everything back. Very bassy. That was mainly the neck pickup there. So they got a very deeper, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. They've got a very brighter tone to them, and you can get some of the deeper stuff if you roll, you know, the tones back and stuff like you always do. We're going to check all that out a little bit more. Back in the day, let's kind of talk about going back again to when these first came out. There was some classic colors. You had Silver Mist Poly, Heather Poly, Kerry Green, Pelham Blue, which is what this is, Cardinal Red, Aztec Bronze was a finish. You know, very car-like, to even the names were. So you got to remember you're dealing with Ray Dietrich, who was behind this whole thing. So his, you know, this has you could see like the tail fins and all this right out of an automobile. The colors even on them were just beautiful. I mean, it was really a unique step for Gibson, and it still is. There's not really anything like the Firebird. Like I said, because of how long it is and how big it is, everything feels a little bit looser. It's kind of weird, even when you're tuning one of these, if you're using like a strobe tuner or something, it never, you think you've got it, and then you go to tune another string and the other one before it goes out. It's like, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast. You have to kind of ballpark get where it's gonna go. It's just such a big guitar, and everything's so loose because of the strings, the string length being so long, that it just makes for it's a whole different type of thing, and you almost feel like you're playing exactly what it kind of is. It's sort of like a Les Paul combined with a Strat, with it's like you've got a Fender thing going on here, but yet it's still Gibson. So Firebirds are very unique guitars, or they even look unique, the headstock, everything about them. Alright, so let's go ahead and check her out in the case and get some close-ups of this thing and the finish, and I want to talk about the neck and everything like we were before. So let's check it out in the case. Here we go. Okay, so here is the case for the 2017 Gibson Firebird 5 in Pelham Blue. This is not really period correct. It's close. I believe the ones that are coming out in more recent years, like this one, 2017, the cases were brown. Even seen some of them coming out in gig bags, which really bothers me because you should never ever put a guitar, especially this delicate with the headstock and everything, in a gig bag, but that's just my opinion. But this, I know the owner told me this is a mid-2000s case. Let's open her up here. This is about what they would have been like at that time. It's got the Gibson USA logo on there, the big square case, as you can see. So this thing kind of goes right along with the guitar itself. And there she is. Big long guitar and a big long case. So these are pretty crazy to carry around and to play. They're just big guitars in general. Let's get some close-ups here. That beautiful Pelham Blue just pops out of there. I love that color. There's those mini humbuckers. Let's kind of zoom in here with the chrome covers on them. Those are just beautiful too. Again, a lot smaller than your traditional humbucker, which is of course bigger. These are more like the size of a P90, but again, they are not P90s with just chrome over them. They are humbucker pickups, and you would call these mini humbuckers. Nashville style 2-pneumatic bridge with the stop bar tailpiece. 2-tone, 2-volume controls like you traditionally would have. You've got your output jack here on the front of the body like you would with a Firebird. That's the one thing about it's very similar to a Gibson SG. Gets a little crammed down here on a Les Paul. These are spread out a little bit more. Like I said, SGs are the same way. This is very tight down here, but it's just the nature of the beast. And you kind of get used to it after a while, and just working with it that way, it's really not that big of a deal when you get used to it. Then we have the iconic pick guard here that's been seen on tons and tons of Firebirds. And then, of course, that awesome logo that's painted, silk screened on there, the red Firebird. Like I said, the very first year of the Gibson Firebird, that was not on there. And then Ray Dietrich and Ted McCarty, Gibson's president at the time, decided to go ahead and put that on there. 3-way toggle switch, which is down here as opposed to like up here where you would have it on, say, like a Les Paul or something like that, which, like I said, that's kind of why the whole thing is flipped from what you normally would have had, especially at that time in 1963. So that's why they called this body shape reverse, and then non-reverse are the ones that came out later. So again, like I said, it gets a little bit confusing because when you first hear that term, you're thinking, okay, so the original ones came out and then later on they did a reverse series, but no, the very first ones were reverse bodies, what they call them. Again, this would be a Firebird 5 because it does have the binding on the neck going here. It's got the trapezoid inlays instead of dots. That's a rosewood fingerboard. So let's get a shot here. You can see the grain on that rosewood going up. And then up here we have the classic Firebird headstock. You've got a Gibson. If you zoom in here, you can kind of see that's your truss rod cover that comes off. And that's where the Gibson logo is actually silk screened on there in gold. So that obviously comes off if you need to get into the truss rod at all. Banjo style tuners there, which are Steinberger tuners. We've talked about these before. We did a video on the Flying V that we had in, and it had the same type of tuners on them. If you're not familiar with these, if I kind of zoom in, you can see there's no string wraps on Steinberger tuners. So basically the string goes into the hole, and then you tighten this up here and basically lock it down, and then when you tune it in the back, it just kind of pulls the string down in or pushes it back up, and that's how you either raise the pitch or lower the pitch, but there's no windings like you would traditionally have. So you eliminate a lot of tuning problems that way. Steinberger tuners are great, and I know Gibson owns Steinberger, and they have for quite some time, so that's why they use quite a bit of their stuff. Let's talk about that neck through body thing a little bit again. So you can kind of see here, these are mahogany wings that are just glued on the sides. And then, of course, they have the electronics and all that in here running through. But ultimately, the guitar itself, you can see the separation right here. It's just this piece of mahogany going up to here, right into the neck, all the way up to the headstock. Let's flip this over and kind of get a better look here at what we're talking about. Okay, so here's the back of the guitar, Pelham Blue. You can see that body there as well, running up with the glued-on wings. That's exactly the part I'm talking about now on like a Les Paul or, you know, a SG. A lot of guitars that you will see, you see that little, you know, notch there where the neck joins the body, but you also will see like a separation, you know, or a seam or what, you know, you could tell that it's a separate piece. You can plainly see here, there's no separation. There's no seam. That's one piece of wood that runs from here all the way up to here. They carved it out, continued it into the neck, and then it runs all the way up here to the headstock where you have the, you know, and it even says right there, made in USA 2017 model. And you've got those, there's the back of the Steinberger tuners here that you have banjo style that are in the back. And like I said, those are just great. You can also get a beautiful shot of that finish there, that Pelham Blue. Can almost see in spots like right there where the blue's soaked into the wood grain. Like, I mean, that's just really cool. And again, I love this color. Pelham Blue is just great, but that's all just one piece, like we said. So you get into a lot of trouble if anything breaks because there's nothing there that's separated. That neck and the body, it's neck through. So it just runs all the way to the back. And then you've got the two sides there going on, glued to the mahogany center. Okay, and then just another shot here of the front. So yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful guitar. These Firebirds are just great, from what I understand. Pretty hard to make because of the whole neck through thing. So you will see, you know, Gibson periodically stop making them from time to time because I think they're a little bit more of a pain than your traditional Gibson guitars that have the set-in necks. But there she is in the big suitcase type guitar case, which is also big in itself. That is the 2017 Gibson Firebird 5 in Pelham Blue. Just a beautiful guitar. All right, guys, so there she is in the case. Let's take her for a test drive here like we always do. Literally, this was designed by a car designer, and so we're going to drive her. Let's do a little slide, Johnny Winter type of a thing, of course, as a tribute to Johnny. I was fortunate to be around Johnny a couple times. He was a great guy, huge influence on the guitar community as a whole. Definitely on me. I always loved his playing. So I'm going to do that as a little tribute to him, and then we're just going to kind of let her rip. I'm going to try to get some cleaner tones and more distorted tones in the mix during the entire track when I'm kind of playing along with it and we let her rip. So here we go, the Gibson Firebird 5 2017 in Pelham Blue. Check her out. This is what she sounds like. Here we go. Alright guys, so there is the 2017 Gibson Firebird 5 in Pelham Blue. This is just a beautiful guitar, sounds beautiful. Once again, thank you to our private collector for bringing this in today and letting me do a setup on it, and also taking it for a little test run here and doing a review. Thanks again, you guys, for checking in today. As please hit that subscribe button right down there in the bottom corner. I really appreciate it. I always love you guys watching, but I even more appreciate it when you subscribe, so please do. Check us out on Facebook at Todd Beebe Music, and comment. Let us know what you think of the Firebirds. I love them. They're great guitars. But we will see you guys again, and we'll have more stuff coming your way. Stay safe and love your dogs. We'll see you guys. Take care.